Hey guys, Pastor Tanner here, coming at you with another commentary review. In today's video, we're going to look at Boice's Expositional Commentaries, 27 volumes in Logos. This is James Montgomery Boice. Is it worth your time? Is it worth your money? Let's go ahead and take a look. So here you can see we are looking at Boice's Expositional Commentaries, 27 volumes in Logos. Now this set is normally $400, but you can see I happen to be recording this video when it is on mega sale for $99.99. That's 75% off. Don't pay full price for this, guys. Go ahead and make sure you're getting it on sale. Now, I can't guarantee it will always be this low. I think this is the lowest I've ever seen it, but try to make sure you're getting this on sale. Now, what this is Boice put together a bunch of commentaries based upon his sermons. Now, I want you to know it's not just wrote his sermons put in. Instead, he had preached these sermons, and then he had compiled the commentaries after the fact. So it's pretty cool. 27 volumes. And you can see several of the commentary sets are based upon multiple volumes out of a major book. So 3 volumes in Genesis, you can see 3 volumes in the Psalms, 4 in Romans, 5 in John, etc. Let's go ahead and look at some more details. Now, initially, you might be asking yourself, who is James Montgomery Boice? Well, he taught at Harvard and at Princeton. He was born in 1938, and he preached throughout his lifetime from 1968 up until when he had passed away. And he was really well known in Presbyterian circles, and he was also part of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Now, like I said, he put together these commentaries after years and years of preaching and teaching from the pulpit. He preached at 10th Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, and he was a pretty well-known preacher. Now, I want you to know that although this set has 27 volumes, many of them are tied up in multi-volume sets. So again, Genesis, Psalms, the Minor Prophets, Matthew, etc. What this means is you are not getting a lot of treatment of all of the books of the Bible. So for the first question of whether or not this is worth your time or money, you have to ask yourself, are you okay missing a lot of books of the Bible? You're only getting 17 out of 39 of the Old Testament books, and let's be honest, most of those are in the Minor Prophets, and you're only getting 9 out of 27 of the New Testament books. So first, you really have to ask yourself, are you doing something in Romans? Are you doing something in John? Are you doing something in one of the Minor Prophets? If not, you might want to pass on these. That said, in those areas where he has treated those individual books, he's done a pretty good job. And I will say that when you go to Best Commentaries, most of his commentaries don't perform fantastically, but he does have some really nice commentaries when it comes to the Minor Prophets. Also, you can see his commentary on the Sermon on the Mount, number 6. Now, that's a pretty small domain of commentaries. And Romans, number 19, Joshua, number 11. So that's off of bestcommentaries.com. Now, what is an expository or an expositional commentary, you might ask? Expository commentaries are typically written by pastors and expository Bible teachers who teach verse by verse through the Bible. This is just a definition I pulled off the web, okay? These commentaries usually include teaching notes, outlines, illustrations, and practical applications of the author's study and teaching of the books of the Bible. So what happened is a pastor typically went through and he studied a passage, he wrote a sermon, he preached that sermon, and then the expository commentaries are compiled after the fact. They are robust with illustrations and applications. They're a little bit lighter on exegesis. You're not getting in-depth, rigorous academic study out of these because they are meant to be for the layman as you preach them, okay? That's the important idea. Now, because of that, there's actually not a lot of detail for many of the authors that typically write about commentary sets. So, for example, Carson here doesn't reference Boice very much in his commentary survey, but at one point he does say John Stott in the BST series is more focused and condensed than the work of a similar vision by James Montgomery Boice. So this is the vein in which you're navigating when it comes to an expository commentary, and they're just not treated as seriously. Longman doesn't even bother to mention him when you look at Longman's commentary survey. That said, those commentary surveys that are seeking to help out preachers and teachers will often reference these. So if you go to Roscup actually references Boice multiple times and talks about this commentary set. He says things like this: broad exposition here is not verse by verse. The longtime pastor of 10th Presbyterian, and he chooses doctrinal and practical emphases which can help a Christian to grow by seeing how to apply truths. Okay. Or in a different commentary set, he says, if a Christian took time to read these pages and dwelt on the principles over a span of weeks or months, he could grow much by applying them. So you can see that those who are really concerned about preaching and teaching, growth of Christians, the laymen, or those who are in a regular church setting, they take Boice's work seriously, and they're interested in how it might apply to people who might be reading it. So the first thing I want you to know about Boice is that you need to know what you are getting into. I personally love expository and expositional commentaries, but they are not everybody's cup of tea. The reason I like them is I am a busy pastor, and throughout the week when I'm preparing a sermon, I'm often trying to think up illustrations or applications for my congregation. This can be a lot harder than it sounds. I don't know about you, but I love to dig into the text itself. I love to do the theological study. I love to do the exegesis. That stuff comes naturally to me. But when I have to sit down and think of a practical illustration of how this might relate to somebody else's life, that's a real challenge for me. Reading expository commentaries can help to fire the engine of my imagination so that I can apply the truth to somebody else's life in a way that is meaningful for them. So I love commentaries like this, but you need to consider if this is what you're interested in. Now, let's start with the layout. I give the layout a 2 out of 5. I do not like the layout of this commentary set, and I'm going to tell you why right here. Essentially, all you have is the title of the chapter, then you have the text itself, Romans 9:14-15 here, and then he jumps in. You have very little breakdown in terms of trying to understand, are you talking about illustrations here? Are you talking application? Is this where you're going to get a little bit exegetical on me? None of that. And you're just going to have to read pretty much from the beginning till the end to get the sense of what he's treating. This makes sense because they're expository, but the fact of the matter is, unless you want to come read this entire chapter on the section, you're not going to be well served by the commentary set. So the layout isn't very helpful. Sure, he has headings, but these are just thoughts that he thought were important to include when it comes to considering the topic. So I don't like the layout. It's not easy to navigate, but if you're reading the expository commentary set in a certain way, the layout doesn't matter. So just consider that. 2 out of 5 for me. Hard to find, especially with smaller pericopes. You might not even find your verse after going through the entire section. Now that I've talked about the layout, I just want to go over some overall thoughts and impressions that I felt about the set as I was reading through. Now, you guys will remember that in this series, I am not claiming to have read any of these commentaries cover to cover. That's not the goal here. Instead, what I have done is I have gone through and surveyed his work for myself and read fairly in depth in certain sections. I especially like to go to those very difficult Bible passages that are real challenges for people to treat and to see what the commentator has to say about it. Because oftentimes in those very difficult Bible sections, you'll get a real feel for how they are treating the text of Scripture. So we're just getting a broad overview here of just my general impressions. The first thing that I noticed is that he tends to be a bit oriented towards historical background and at times theological background, but he does this in a very conversational way. The first place I noticed this was in Daniel. As I was going through Daniel, I was looking at the issue of Nebuchadnezzar and the golden statue and how it's broken up in the different phases. You have the gold, you have the silver, on, and just listen to how he breaks all of this down. You can hear a lot of historical background here. The third part of the statue was made of brass. It represents the kingdom of the Greeks established by Alexander the Great. Alexander was a remarkable man and a military genius. He was born in Macedonia, but after the death of his father Philip in 336 BC, he crossed the Hellespont into what we call Turkey, at that time a portion of the Persian Empire. And he goes on and on. You see a lot of historical detail here. Now, some people are really going to like this information, but if you're not historically driven or theologically driven, you're going to find a lot of the areas that he places his emphasis aren't interesting to you. So I just wanted to note that for you. Again, though, I want you to see that he does this in a conversational way. I noticed this in Joshua. Listen to how he is talking about how people in the situation of Rahab and Jericho might have been talking with one another when it came to discussing the Israelites. Listen to what he says. He says, "Have you heard what happened in Egypt?" One of them might have asked. He would have told how God had sent plagues on the Egyptians, plagues that turned the water of the Nile River into blood, brought flies and frogs upon the land, destroyed the cattle, and blotted out the sun. Last of all, he killed the firstborn. Did you hear what happened at the Red Sea? Another would continue. On and on he goes. These people are still around, a third customer might say. Notice the very conversational tone. He's essentially indicating for us that what he's trying to do here is paint a picture. This is where that illustration comes into play. This is where that application comes into play. So if you're going to go to Boice, you're going to be either getting a very theological style or a very historical style in terms of the explanation, and that's going to be wed with a very conversational tone that lends itself to an illustrative, imaginative frame, okay? That's really a lot of what his commentaries are all about. In light of this, I just want to orient you to the book of Acts, where he talks about some of his theological positions when it comes to the issue of speaking in tongues, okay? What you're getting out of Boice here is you're getting typical Reformed Protestant theology with a few illustrations and applications thrown in. That's the emphasis in all of these commentaries. One of the things I noticed as I was reading through his commentary on the book of Acts is listen to all of his Protestant theology bleed through. He's talking about speaking in tongues. He says, this indicates that apart from the breath of God, man was just dead matter. He was dead as dust. And then he further goes on to say, there is a distinction between being baptized with the Holy Spirit, which we hear a great deal about today, and being filled with the Holy Spirit. Notice the theology that is infiltrating. There's a difference between baptism and being filled. Why is he doing this? Well, he tends to be of a more cessationist position. He tends to be more skeptical of speaking in tongues in our day and age, so he needs to introduce this theological disjunction. Okay? If you are familiar with this move, if you're an evangelical or a cessationist, you're going to be completely comfortable with this. But notice how he just throws it in there. And then a lot of the discussion is illustrations and applications. Even further down, you can see he does a similar thing when he begins talking about the symbolism of speaking in tongues, with the tongues of fire that descended upon the apostles. He says, the symbolism taught that this was a unilateral covenant. It meant that God was establishing it on his own authority entirely apart from Abraham's participation. Sometimes there are bilateral covenants. Human beings enter into these. God does something and then they do something. But this time, God did not ask Abraham's participation. Abraham did not have to do anything. Again, if you're familiar with covenant theology, you will recognize this immediately. The idea between a bilateral or a unilateral covenant is a very common theological theme for those who are committed to the covenant theology position. Just know that that's what you're getting when you're diving into these commentary sets. You're getting this type of very stereotypical Reformed Protestant theology with a lot of illustrations and applications thrown in. When I was reviewing Boice's commentaries, it actually reminded me of Brian Chappell's breakdown of the three components in preaching. There are three general components: explanation, illustration, and application. And in a balanced sermon, you treat all of these equally. You spend an equal amount of time on the explanation, the illustration, and the application. But you can see there are different variations that you can introduce. The reason I'm bringing this up is that Boice is very much of the example C approach. You will read through an individual chapter, and it is heavy on explanation, either driven by systematic theology or driven by historical background. There is a little bit of exegesis thrown in. He does sometimes reference the original languages, but it's a little more rare. But he's very heavy on explanation. I imagine if you were to just preach one of Boice's chapters, it would feel very much like this example C. Now, I don't know that he actually preached this way. Again, the commentary was composed after the fact. So he might have put the commentary together like this on purpose because it's a commentary after all. Maybe it's appropriate to have a little more explanation, but that's what you're getting. In each sermon, maybe one or two illustrations, maybe one or two sentences of application right at the end, but a lot of explanation, but in a conversational tone. That's the idea. One of the things I really appreciated about Boice's commentary set is that he is not afraid of tough issues. Like I told you, I like to reference some of the harder verses to see what the preachers and commentators are going to do, and he faced these verses head on. One of the examples was in Ephesians. In Ephesians, he's actually talking specifically about the fact that Paul tells us to be submissive to our masters. Ephesians 6:5-9. What is he going to do with the topic of slavery here? Well, he doesn't just gloss over it. He makes the entire sermon about this issue. Christianity and slavery. He deals with it in depth. He talks about the duty of employees and the duty of employers. It's a very, very well done sermon with good practical application, and he faces this very contemporary issue head on. Hats off to Boice. He did not run away from things. This was also evident in his Psalms commentary as well. I chose Psalm 137, and if you remember, right at the end of Psalm 137, there's an imprecation at the very, very end. Right here, he says, a terrible imprecation. O daughters of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is he who repays you for what you have done to us, he who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. Whoa. He doesn't skip this at all. He jumps right in. He deals with the issue in as best a way as he can. And he talked about some practical application of how we should think about these things as well. Not only that, he turned the imprecation around upon the reader themselves and says, except we repent, we too will all likewise perish. I thought this was great. He faced these issues head on, and he was wide open to facing the difficult passages in the Bible. So that's a bit of a broad overview of the things that really jumped out at me when I was surveying James Montgomery Boice's work. Overall, I like the work very much, but again, you need to know what you're getting into. If you're trying to get some really in-depth exegesis out of it, it's not going to serve you well. With that said, I want to just review 5 categories and my ratings in each category with a little bit of explanation. First, on the question of exegesis. I'm sorry, I have to give Boice a 2 out of 5 on exegesis. I know some people in my tradition are going to criticize me for that. He at least deserves a 3 out of 5, but please hear me out. First of all, the pericopes he selected in most of the works were too broad. He selected a wide range, so you can't really get into in-depth verse-by-verse exegesis. Instead, he was just treating themes, and he often tended to be more theological than exegetical. Not only that, but there was a lot of importing of theological categories. And so because of this, I did not often get the feel that he was deriving a lot of his thoughts from the text itself. Again, it was very expository, but not very exegetical. If you're looking at a specific phrase or passage or a specific Greek or Hebrew word, you're not going to be well helped here with Boice. 2 out of 5 for exegesis. That might not be bad. If you have an exegetical commentary that you're pairing Boice with, that might be a perfect combination, but don't come here just for your exegesis. However, when it comes to exposition, I have to give Boice a 4 out of 5. This is a great adaptation of sermons for a commentary context. There are robust illustrations and applications with still plenty of explanation as well. I thought that was very good, and I just enjoyed reading him. You could get lost going chapter after chapter after chapter. That is the mark of good exposition. He doesn't drag on. He isn't wasting your time. He's just fun to read, and so I've got to give him expositionally a 4 out of 5, one of the greats. Now, creativity. And you will remember that what I am dealing with in creativity is I want a commentary that's going to spark or fire my imagination, that's going to get me thinking along very illustrative or application-oriented lines. And for this category, I have to give Boice a 3 out of 5. I wanted to give him a 4, but I just couldn't do it, and that's because he's so heavy on explanation. Yes, there are some illustrations there. Yes, there is some application there, but it's not enough that I know if I read a full chapter that I'm going to get that from him. Sometimes that wasn't the case. So I got to give him a 3 out of 5. It's there, and oftentimes I had ideas or thoughts of my own, but he's so explanation heavy and from a conversational tone that I just wasn't getting the creativity I wanted out of him for this kind of work. 3 out of 5. All right, for difficulty, and I rate difficulty here, 1 is the best because it's the most accessible, 5 is the worst because it's the most difficult. I give him a 2 out of 5 for difficulty. Very, very accessible work here. I absolutely loved reading through it. He can be theological at times and sometimes be treating words that you're not going to understand, but it's going to be very, very rare. And those things you can continue to gloss over because everything else is so readable. He was just really, really accessible. And so I got to give him a 2 out of 5 for difficulty. I just loved reading it. Finally, for layout, you guys already saw, I give him a 2 out of 5 for layout. It's just difficult because you're going to probably have to read that full chapter. Rather than being able to jump around and pick and choose what's of interest to you, you're just going to have to read the full thing. And you may or may not, by the end of it, have been helped with a good illustration or application that you're looking for. As a busy pastor, I don't have a lot of spare time to be reading full chapters in the hope that I might find something. And so because of that, I've got to give him a 2 out of 5 on layout. Let me give my summary of the set with 3 caveats at the end. My summary is this. This is an accessible set that can be accessed devotionally and inspirationally with great profit. Pastors and preachers can read this to great effect when looking for illustrations and applications. I will remind you of something that Ross Cupp said about Boice. He said if a Christian took time to read these pages and dwelt on the principles over a span of weeks or months, he could grow much by applying them. I agree 1,000%. This is a perfect commentary set if you are going to be personally reading through that book of the Bible and want to read a commentary along with it. You're going to love reading Boice, and it's going to be of great benefit to you. Not only that, if you're a preacher or a teacher, you're going to be well served by reading Boice week after week to see what he comes up with. Sometimes he's going to be of great help to you, sometimes not so much, but you're going to be well served regardless. 3 caveats. First, this is Reformed, it's Presbyterian, it's theological, and it's conservative. If you're looking for a commentary set from that background, then this might be up your alley. But don't look for a lot of differing or divergent opinions here. You're not going to get them. He toes the party line. My second caveat is this. This is an uneven treatment. As you saw, sure, 27 volumes are there, but many of these are multi-volume sets, so you're just missing vast swaths of the Bible. You need to make sure that you're going to get good use out of John or Romans or one of the more in-depth treated sections. Not only that, but when you're going through a specific passage, sometimes the individual verse you're looking for is not even treated. He selects a pericope that's 11 verses, and your passage happens to be in there, but he glosses over it. That might very well happen, so there's an uneven treatment. Finally, the third caveat, preachers, please beware. It can be so easy to cookie cutter James Montgomery Boice's sermons and essentially plagiarize them yourselves. I actually searched in Google for an illustration that he used because I thought it was really good, and it was used out of the book of Daniel. When I typed Daniel and that illustration or ideas from that illustration into Google, I saw many other pastors' sermons pop up that were almost pure plagiarism of James Montgomery Boice. That is scary, guys. It can be so easy to use expository commentaries this way, to be lazy and not do your homework and just cookie cutter cut somebody else out. Please look at the illustrations, but then use them to fire your own imagination and either use the illustration and cite James Montgomery Boice or use it to inspire a new illustration for yourself. Okay, there you go, guys. I hope that video helped you to understand whether or not you want James Montgomery Boice's expositional commentary set, 27 volumes. I like it. I refer to it often. I've read many of the pages, many of the chapters from many of these commentaries, and perhaps you might find it helpful as well. I appreciate all of you watching us here on YouTube. Please click like and subscribe, and we'll see you again real soon here on the Pastor Tanner channel. Take care. God bless. Bye.